Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Joseph Parker will not be facing Derek Chisora, with Parker's promoter at Duco Events, David Higgins, specifically the Duco boss, pulling the pin. He isn't going to have Joseph Parker go into a camp, a shortened camp for this fight. They've said that they've been waiting for a contract, it hasn't come, they're sick of waiting, and Derek Chisora will not be fighting Joseph Parker on April 20th. And Higgins has even labelled Chisora'S actions as cowardly, because he says Chisora has been training for 3 weeks for a fight, and he says that Chisora wants to crib an advantage for himself and force Joseph Parker into a short camp, which Higgins says ain't gonna happen. So we'll crack into it. Buckle in. Let's go. So there's multiple stories out on New Zealand media now. Here's one from News Hub. Team Parker sick of waiting on Derek Chisora. Also another one here, stuff.co.nz. Joseph Parker pulls out of Derek Chisora fight as stalled talks impact training time. We can't really pull out of the fight because it hasn't been made, but we see what they mean. But it says here, Joseph Parker's proposed London fight with Derek Chisora in April won't happen after the Kiwi heavyweight's handlers ran out of patience with trying to finalise the deal in time. Parker will now look to start his year with another New Zealand fight, with his promoter David Higgins saying, "We have some good options." Having controversially, we're not going to get to that one, Higgins accused the British camp of skullduggery, believing they were drawing out negotiations for the April 20 date to limit Parker's preparations while Chisora was already in full training with his new coach, Dave Caldwell. And Higgins says, after a good month of trying to make the fight happen and a lot of rhetoric, we still don't have a contract. We have signalled in the last week that we are at the 11th hour and we aren't going to run a shortened camp. Derek Chisora's approach is cowardly. He watched his compatriot Dillian Whyte force Joe into a 7-week camp with home advantage and officials. Instead of trying to run a fair fight with a fair lead in time, Chisora has been in training for 3 weeks. They are basically trying to steal a few weeks advantage and home advantage. Maybe they thought we were desperate, but no, we are calling their bluff. There's a saying that beggars can't be choosers, but I'm both, so this fight won't be happening on those terms. The message to Del Boy is that Joseph Parker will fight him anywhere, anytime, but on fair terms. That means a decent camp and no officiating controversies we've put up with so far, in brackets in the UK. If they want the fight, we're going to have to talk about new dates and potentially new locations. And then he says, the problem here is all risk return. They are asking us to take a big risk for a low return. Higgins said, adding that overnight texts from British promoter Eddie Hearn were too little, too late. Don't get me wrong, I like Eddie Hearn and David Hay, Chisora's manager. They are some of the good guys in business, and Hearn has been very busy with the Anthony Joshua Jarrell Miller announcement, but we have been very politely requesting progress for a month. The fact that they are making contact now suggests they were trying to run Joe's camp down. Higgins has already turned his attentions to Plan B, with matchmaker Stuart Duncan sifting through options for a New Zealand fight, and Stuart Duncan is Duco's long-time matchmaker. We'll just keep going down the story. Actually, there's a poll here. Who should Kiwi heavyweight Joseph Parker fight next? Derek Chisora? Well, they've just kind of ruled that out. Alexander Usyk? Well, Duco's ruled that out, said they haven't been contacted. They're not really interested anyway, because the money wouldn't be there. That's what they've basically said. Alexander Povetkin, that's an interesting option, but he looks like he will be facing Usyk. David Price, well, he's fighting March 30th, not happening. Luis Ortiz is fighting at March 2nd. It's a possibility, but again, Duco is after premium paychecks. I can't see them doing that fight, and they'd have to bring Ortiz to New Zealand, and would Ortiz want to travel to New Zealand? Unlikely. Then it goes on to say, there's been frequent talk of trying to engage Australian slugger Lucas Brown. Brown scheduled to fight in Britain in early March, which complicates his involvement. Well, they're a bit not up on the play there. Brown is having a tune-up on March 2nd in Scotland, and then he is scheduled to face Dave Allen. That fight has been made. That was going to be on the same card for April 20. So if Brown gets through the 2nd of March, and there's no guarantees that's against Kamil Sokolowski. He's sort of upset a couple of guys, Naylor Ball being one, Nick Webb being another in 2018. But if he does get through that, then Dave Allen awaits. So Brown, he's not really an option. There's no guarantees he wins. If Lucas Brown has one more loss, the Parker fight, that's done. Parker last fought in December, knocking out American-Mexican Alexander Flores, but Higgins realizes he needs to attract a better opponent to make another Kiwi promotion viable. Joe did a good job there and showed what he can do when he brings some intent. We would probably take a step up from there and takes someone rising through the ranks. We have some good options. So that just sort of fills me with dread, because they're past the point now where they can actually get a name that fans, like real boxing fans, not just the casual fan, no one wants to travel to New Zealand seemingly to fight a Joseph Parker unless they have to, unless it's like an eliminator, Duco wins a purse bid or something like that. And Higgins saying here would probably take a step up from there and take someone rising through the ranks. You can guarantee it's going to be someone that really we don't want to see, and it'll be another overpriced pay-per-view, because that is the model. They try to get someone who's got a credible looking record and sell it to the casual fan. Joseph Parker, his heavyweight journey, all that sort of stuff. $39.95, $49.95. It's what I call the Duco special. And even if they do have a loss, it'll be 1 or 2 losses max. And that's where the Chisora fight, I was a little bit hesitant to think if it was going to get made, just for the possibility that would they be able to sell it back in New Zealand, a guy with 9 losses. It's a bit of a harder sell to sort of say this guy is world class with 9 losses. It is a bit counterintuitive, even though Derek Chisora is way better than most of the fodder that Parker has fought on pay-per-view in New Zealand. So these New Zealand-based fights, if they are going to have another New Zealand-based fight, it's probably unlikely to be anyone that we're going to want to see. And if we look at the options, well, maybe we don't need to if the guys who are available, because if they're talking New Zealand-based fight, that probably means there's nothing out there overseas at the moment, the United States or the UK, that they're interested in. If they're talking New Zealand-based fight, they've already been exploring that. He said, we've got some good options. Anyone who is rising the ranks coming through is probably unlikely to take a fight against Joseph Parker, who's still a top 10 heavyweight. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 guys that you could sort of go, well, they could. But, Filip Hrgovic, for example, or Alexander Usyk or Joe Joyce, they're not going to travel to New Zealand and face Joseph Parker. It's a reality. That's not going to happen. They will all be campaigning in the bigger markets of the US or the UK. The person who comes to New Zealand is someone who needs an opportunity, someone who needs a breakthrough, someone who thinks they might be able to upset Joseph Parker, but in reality they'll be an overmatched opponent and they'll come up short, probably either get stopped or, Joseph Parker canters to a points decision. So this whole thing is very disappointing, because I think of all the options that were out there at the moment that were available, because remember, most of the top guys, even most of the top 50 guys, have fights at the moment, or, are coming off injuries or have other things in the pipeline, not named Joseph Parker. So pointing to an immediate opponent that we'd all like to see, it becomes a bit trickier, because the location also becomes a factor. And if it is in New Zealand, it's unlikely to be any of these really big names we'd want to see. It's just a reality. They're not going to overpay that person to come here. I guess, one rematch I'd like to see is potentially Carlos Takam, but he probably, after his loss in New Zealand, which he thought he won that fight, he's probably not coming back, and he wouldn't come back cheap anyway. So the situation with Chisora is disappointing on a number of fronts. And if Chisora has truly been training for 3 weeks and dicking around Parker and Duco on the contracts, you can understand them not wanting to sort of put themselves in a position where they do something that they, could jeopardize Parker's career, because he is 1 loss away at this point, because he's in a rebuild. He's 1 loss away from being relatively irrelevant within the heavyweight division. If he lost to Derek Chisora, it's a long way back to a title shot. Minimum probably 3 years, and you'd have to look good coming back up anyway. So Derek Chisora apparently cowardly in his approach, what he's doing, according to David Higgins, not liking it. And if they want to make a Chisora fight, they've got to look at other dates, because April 20th is not happening. They're not going to shortchange themselves on a camp. And he says Chisora is in training mode for Joseph Parker right now, or at least for that date, knowing he's going to be fighting someone. But you could probably argue, I mean, Joseph Parker, if he was going to be out in May, he probably could have done something similar. But I guess they didn't want to, get him into camp early. A lot of money for that sort of thing. And then obviously if nothing happens, it's money down the drain. But Joseph Parker, interesting to see what happens next, because if it's another New Zealand-based fight, I don't have any hope it'll be anyone good. I don't. The reality is most of the opponents that have been brought to New Zealand that haven't been for either an eliminator or a title shot in Andy Ruiz, and Carlos Takam was the eliminator, all the rest, it's been rubbish. It really has been rubbish. And they're very careful at matching Parker with someone with a credible looking record, but really, it's not what we'd all want to see him in. But I guess if needs must, and there's nothing out there at the moment, they just may do that, clip the ticket, and we could see another Duco special. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.